Hello, mindful friends. Today we're talking about the fourth step in making peace with our suffering, which is to listen. So the first was to stop avoiding our suffering. Then we wanted to stop fighting our suffering. Then we wanted to create a safe space. And it's within this safe space that we can truly listen to the suffering. So a lot of us in all those other kind of stages of avoiding and fighting, we are running away from what feels like suffering in our lives. The discomfort, the dis-ease, the pain, whatever it is, we're wanting to move away from it, hide from it, deny it, whatever. And I love the little story of he's a man in the woods and he's running away from this noise that he hears in the woods. And as you're running, it's like your adrenaline is pumping, the fear is building. You know, it's almost like the act of running that builds more fear in you. That's kind of that feedback loop. The more you kind of confirm it with your actions and how you're behaving, the bigger the fear gets and the more the suffering is. And he's running and running and running, and then, you know, all of a sudden he can't anymore. It's like just he's exhausted, he can't run, and he turns around and looks, expecting this big giant monster that has been chasing him. Like, why else would he be so afraid? There's this crazy thing after him. And he turns around and looks, you know, he pauses. He actually has to stand still to physically turn around and look and be present for it. And he sees that what he was running from was just a little field mouse. Now that kind of reflects the teaching here that the more we panic, the more we want to avoid the suffering, the more fear we have around it, the larger it becomes in our minds and in our experience. And like we've talked about before, our perception of reality creates our reality. So if we think that it's the monster chasing us, but we never stop to look, then our reality is that it's the monster. Say we run all the way out of the woods and we get back home. We're panicked, we're exhausted, we're panting, our heart's beating. And what do? You know, someone asks, man, what happened? A monster was chasing me in the woods. And we hadn't even confirmed that, but now that's our reality. And that's what we just shared with somebody else. And then the fear, what happens to it? It grows deeper in us because we never sat with it and developed a true perspective. But then it also grows in the people around us because we just shared that with the people in our lives. This is really something to be afraid of. It's huge and awful. The same thing happens with our suffering. If we're always trying to avoid it, we feel a little discomfort, we hop on media and distract ourselves. We feel a little discomfort, we drink that, glass of alcohol. We have not taken the time to be that guy in the woods who stops, is very present, stays aware, and turns around. So when we're doing those things, we're actually feeding the monster story, feeding the story within us. We're not allowing ourselves the time to truly understand and to develop a perspective that could serve us better than the monster story. And this is not to undermine the suffering that we're feeling. Of course, these things in our lives that are hard, those discomforts we feel, the pain, the illness, whatever it is a monster sometimes. But by not listening, by not staying present and looking, the monster gets bigger. That's like, it feels counterintuitive, right? You want to run away from the monster. You want to keep it in the closet in any way that you can. But the true way to turn that perspective is to stop and be present and listen. So that's what we do in this phase, is listening. We want to be with. And that's why in the last phase we kind of created that safe space to be able to listen. So if we're really hard for that guy that he's running through the woods, his heart's racing, he's scared, that's not a good condition to turn around and be with the monster, the suffering, whatever. So that's why before we do that, we say, all right, I need to pause. I know this is within me. I know this suffering is present. I need to create that safe space. And then in that safe space, I can sit with the suffering. Ooh, scary term, right? Nobody wants to sit with their suffering. Yuck. But that is the way to healing. And it can actually be quite insightful. It can actually feel relieving, really, because what happened to the guy in the woods? He got to be with, and then he saw that it was a mouse, and instantly the relief came. Now, sometimes that's not, it's not the case, but at least when we're listening, we start seeing a path out. So we listen. And when we're listening, this is very different than listening to why, it is why it's there, but when we think of why, we think of blaming outside things. That's kind of our first tendency. I'm going to sit with my suffering, and my first tendency is going to be, who caused this? Why is it their fault? The world around me is awful. It's causing it. We get trapped in that. And then that blaming pushes us to want to control the outside world. This, my friends, will create more suffering. Because most of the time we can't control in this moment what other people are doing, the conditions of the world in that way. But what we can control, not a great word, but what we can have kind of empower ourselves to do is create a positive change within us. So when we're looking and listening at this, the suffering, with the pain, with whatever it is, we're looking at the why that's internal. So you're looking at the causes of suffering that are in your thoughts, your beliefs, your perspectives, and that point to, for you, what of your basic values and needs were being threatened in this situation. And those are what really make this painful for us. This is really the cause of suffering, is that there's something we really believe or we value that is being compromised. And as we're listening to our suffering, that's what we want to understand. So the big monster might be societal problems that we're afraid of or we're uncertain about, and that's a huge monster. But when we turn and look and we listen and we turn that focus inward, we say, what's really threatened within me? Aha. And this is where it can turn from that giant monster that there is no way we can defeat on our own into something more reasonable, more accessible within ourselves that we could shift. This is when we find, it's not the whole state of society, it's my feeling of instability, my feeling of being unsafe. And in the listening phase, this is what we want to identify. And it's also in things of we're fearful, we're sick, we're in pain in our body. Sometimes we can't control the medical system, we can't force them to find a solution, but we can turn inwards and say, I feel like I'm not going to be loved if I'm sick and can't perform. That makes it, it's still, that's a huge thing, but it's something that you can now grasp, and we can shift that in how we see ourselves and how we see our loved ones in our relationships. So in the listening phase, this is what you're looking for. What's the real cause? And these values, bring them back down to the real ones, which are the basics: safety, stability, love, belonging, acceptance, nourishment. And what in those feels threatened? And that's what brings that huge monster back home into self, into something that you can take care of, which in step 5, which is our final step, I will cover the nurturing. So once we identify that, how do we nurture ourselves back into well-being? So I invite you this week to look into what are those monsters in your life and your perspective around them. Are you putting it all external, looking at the external world, blaming other people? And can you bring that back in, bring it inside, and look at what really feels threatened within you? If you enjoy these little talks and would like to join us for a group session or individual coaching, you can visit us at newleafmindfulness.com. You can find other talks and guided meditations on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I hope to see you all very soon.